Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Being Formed podcast. My name is Adam. I'm the host of the show, as well as the president and co-founder of LifePoint Resources, along with my wife, Rebecca. Today, we want to introduce you to one of our soul care team members, Shawn Smith, and let you have a chance to hear his story. We're also excited to introduce something new called a Worship Leader Collective. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. Hello, Shawn Smith, and welcome to the Being Formed podcast. How you doing today?
Hey, Adam. I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for the people listening to the podcast to get to know you. It would be such a delight for me to be able to introduce all the people who are on our soul care team with LifePoint, just have conversations like this with them. And so you get to be the first. Thank you for saying yes to this new thing, man. And I think that the reason why we both felt like this was an important conversation to have now is multiple layers. And one is that as we're recording this, we're heading into Holy Week. So we're recording this the Friday before Palm Sunday. So you, as a worship pastor, people are going to get to hear your story. You are about to enter into the Super Bowl of weeks, right? For people who work in churches and really for worship leaders and all the different events that you're helping to facilitate there. You can ask my wife. This is totally true. Like, one of the biggest important weeks for me to take off when I was in worship ministry was like Easter Sunday, the week after. Like I had to get away. Almost like an accountant who, like, everything builds up to April 15th and then they take their big vacation. That was really true for me. So as people are listening to this, it'll be a couple weeks after Easter. And I think it's a good time, I think, for them to actually be paying attention to the health of their souls after something that is so good, but also so taxing. So I'm looking forward to people getting to know you and to hear your story. And so I'm just going to ask you, Shawn, if you would take it from here and just let our listeners into your life, into your journey of soul care, what you noticed about how you realized you even needed soul care as a worship pastor, and just for you to have a chance to share what makes you passionate about worship leaders in particular and their own care for their soul. So I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah. As a worship leader, I think I always kind of approached worship leadership wanting to facilitate people in connecting with God. And so I'd never wanted to be like a rock star or anything like that, type of a deal, which can be a temptation that some worship leaders can, kind of fall into. For better or worse, that's something that, you have a stage, and that can cause problems in your soul if you're coming at it from that point. But I think luckily that was not something that I ever wanted to. Maybe some of that's because I'm an introvert, and so it's like, I'm like, I don't really want this stage or like this stage, but it's something that God had called me into just by giving me kind of opportunities. I started off, I guess, in worship ministry in high school. One summer, like junior year, I got a bass guitar and was going to be in a band I have a twin brother. With my twin brother, we were going to be in a band, and we practiced once and did nothing with it. Somebody at church found out. He had gone away to college and studied worship ministry, and somehow he found out that I had a bass guitar. And so he was starting a youth praise band. So he's like, "You're going to be the bass player in the youth praise band." Kind of like, I'm like, okay, whatever. Okay, I don't know how to play this thing. And so I got to learn how to play a bass guitar in the context of wanting to facilitate worship. And so that's where my journey kind of started as far as worship ministry goes. And then God gave me opportunities to lead in different capacities. I went to college and felt called to study worship music at Kentucky Christian University, and did their contemporary worship track to get some some how do you do ministry skills and Bible knowledge and those type of things. But yeah, I felt God called me into worship ministry through just giving me opportunities to lead, and then eventually, like, oh, this is what God wants me to do. And so I did that, for many years in a couple of ministry settings, churches, and then I was a part of a parachurch organization that reached out to college students. It was a Christian campus house, and I was like a worship and men's minister there. Um, and that was pretty busy like season, and I always wanted to help people connect with God through worship. And I say that's where my heart is on it. But, in ministry, we can get kind of so wrapped up trying to care for others that we forget to care for our own souls and our own selves. And so some of my journey was I just found myself sort of burning out. This is kind of what forced me into spiritual formation, because it's like all this other stuff that I've done before is not working. Like I'm reading my Bible, I'm, you know, praying to God, I'm doing these things, but in is a tough ministry season. I went to a church and the senior pastor there was burnt out, but didn't realize it until I came. And finally enough was off his plate. He could realize it. So it's like 6 months in, he has to take a sabbatical for like burnout. And then I'm like the other staff member. So I'm like trying to hold this, small church together. And luckily we had somebody that would preach, but pretty much it was just kind of like I was the worship and office administrator guy. So I was like doing all this other stuff. And I kind of was just putting too much pressure on, like, I need to save this church, and it's like, well, that's not what you're supposed to do, but you be faithful to God. And so I found myself in this place of kind of burning out. I ended up going to it was a vineyard church. So I went to a vineyard worship leaders retreat in Cannon Beach, Oregon, which was really, I would say the turning 2015, 2016, I went to these things was a turning point. So my foot into spiritual formation was I'm burning out. I need something. And there was a workshop by a guy that was a worship leader and a spiritual director. He put it on. And it was like spiritual direction kind of ideas for what worship leaders. And so I was looking at like the breakout sessions. I'm like, well, I don't know anything about this. I don't know what this is, spiritual direction. And so I went to this workshop and just noticed a curiosity around spiritual direction and what that is. And then 2016, I went to the same retreat again, and I actually went to the same workshop by the same guy again, because again, the curiosity was there, and my soul needed something, and I was looking for something. And so in that season of kind of burnout and things like that was this curiosity, spiritual direction. I actually was able to do a session with Danny Mullins, who taught me through sustainable faith. In 2017, I started the spiritual director training, and the first year is very much spiritual formation and those type of things. And so I found myself, I'm burnt out, but I'm finding these little things that I think were graces of God. One was like just spiritual direction and getting into receiving it a little bit. Some other spiritual formation things that some of it I was sort of making up. Like there was a labyrinth in this season. I found out like there's a labyrinth, like 5-minute walk from where I lived. Like, and so like on my day off, I would just go and walk that like every week. And I didn't know how to walk a labyrinth. I just kind of made it up. So I was like, I took 2 sticks, went to the middle and made a cross sign in the middle of the labyrinth. And then I would walk it and just kind of pour my heart out to God as I walk towards the middle in this rough season of like, I don't know if this church is going to make it. I feel like I'm just barely holding things together. I don't know what's going on. I'm doing worship ministry, and I was leading worship a lot, like I was doing Sunday morning and home group and worship for the leaders, the church leaders, like gatherings once a month. And like I was leading worship like 3 to 5 times a week at a small church. And that's what was like, I just felt like I got to this point where I'm like, I'm slapping together worship set after worship set, and I'm not like that connection with God and really being able to like prayerfully plan out what songs we're going to do. Cause I think songs form us as well. Like the word forms, but the songs we sing, it's truth into our souls. And I was just so busy and so trying to hold all these things together that I was just like, the joy was being sucked out of it. It's like, here's this, and now I have this next one that I have to prepare for, and this next one. It's just like the grind of things, and just I was doing too much. I even had a mentor, a friend of mine, look at the pace of my life, and he told me like before I was burning out, I was like, if you keep this pace up, you're going to burn out. But I didn't. listen. And so like I'm in this burnout space, finding spiritual formation, spiritual direction, prayerful walking a labyrinth, like going to the middle, pouring my soul out, like all that to say, like that was sort of my journey. And then, like I definitely burnt out, but I didn't blow up. Like some people when they burn out, like they blow up their lives and make crazy, choices and end up, leaving ministry altogether and things like that. And for me, like spiritual formation and direction was a grace to help me to be able to stay, you know, kind of in the game. It felt like God led me to leave that church and kind of did several years of sort of freelance worship leading, gave me some space to get some healing. Some of that came from spiritual direction. Some of that came from you, Adam. You were my spiritual director during that time. And so I'm appreciative of you and the heart that you brought. So now like I'm a worship leader at a small church, and I'm also the director of spiritual formation at this church. And I'm trained as a spiritual director. I do spiritual direction as well. And so having experience seeing like my senior pastor burn out, experiencing my own burnouts, because we want to care for everybody's soul, but we forget to care for our own.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Shawn Smith. I think he's really correct. In our desire to care for other souls, we often lose focus of our own soul's health, which is why I love A Simple Pause. It's a free app for you to download on your iPhone or your Android or your smart tablet. And I love it because if you open it up, you'll see lots of different kinds of pauses. You can listen to something as simple as silence if you want. They actually keep track of time for you just to spend time in silence. But I enjoy the Audio Divina section. Already in our conversation, a guy's name was mentioned, Danny Mullins. Shawn said that Danny was a spiritual director who was his trainer in sustainable faith. Danny was also my trainer, my instructor. We both love Danny Mullins a lot. And actually in the A Simple Pause app, you can listen to Danny Mullins play piano. He is a great musician in his own right, and it's called The Love of Jesus. I was just listening to it this morning, and right in the middle of this beautiful song, this beautiful meditation through music, is the refrain, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. It's not sung, it's just, you just hear that melody played. It's so beautiful. And that's just a taste of what's available on A Simple Pause. So I encourage you to download it today. All right, back to the conversation. Did you notice your journey as being like a linear one where all of a sudden things just started, like you just started coming up out of the darkness? Or would you describe it as like more of a spiral? Or I mean, like, how would you describe the journey? Because I don't want to paint a picture for people of like, once you do this, you're going to be amazed at how great everything goes from there on out. But how would you describe that journey?
Definitely not linear. Like, uh, I mean, probably a mixture of like, I don't know, like spiraling, up and down. Like,
Mhm.
so I don't know. I'm thinking of like like the heart monitor thing is like beep,
Mm. Yeah,
beep,
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
like, so if you picture that and like, let's say like health and Jesus is up here, like, and you're starting I'm like down here with some of these blips, and my
Mhm.
journey's like, I might, I'm doing this up and down type of a thing to where I'm like getting closer to Jesus and wholeness and health. And it's just like, but it's more of like, it's this. And you might come here and bottom out for a period because it's like a
Mhm.
dark time or hard time. And then that's sort of how the journey's been. It's like, I'm doing good. And then like, so forgiveness was another big piece of my journey, forgiving pastors that maybe weren't as understanding or like didn't realize that I was burning out. And so that just kept kind of pushing for more and more from me, and type of things like that. God had to work on me and get me to a place where it's like, oh, I can receive that God is asking me to forgive this person. And then I wrestle with, do I want to actually do that?
Mhm. Mhm.
And eventually wrestling with God and saying, yes, I do. Okay. But forgiveness is forgiving a person that's hurt you doesn't look like a one time, I forgive this person and I give it to you, God. It looks like doing that multiple times over and over again. And you think you've done it, and then you go a long period, and then something in your life looks similar and pricks it,
Mhm.
and you experience it again, and then you're like, "Oh, there's still more work to do here. Okay, I have to
Right.
forget about it." And so I'd say that's been a bit of the journey. Like, so yeah, it's definitely not it's not a one and done. It's a journey, and sometimes it's like the what, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, or,
Mhm.
type of deal. Like, you make some progress, you regress, you make some progress, you regress. But the whole hope and the goal is that as you do that, you're becoming more like Jesus.
Mhm.
You're doing ministry more from a place of health and wholeness and intimacy with Christ. And that's been my experience.
It's
Um,
strikes me as very universally true that we always want to like think we're through whatever the hard transition is before we actually are, and that
mhm,
causes us a lot of pain, a lot of consternation, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of even like kind of going back and wondering what wouldn't it have been maybe better, God, if I would have remained on the other side, like if I would have just
mhm,
stayed over there and not taken this journey with you. And there's just this sense of God saying, please just stay with me, stay with this
mhm,
process. This is for your freedom, this is for your life. I want to give you your life back, the fullness of life. And so it just seems to me that if you say yes to the next thing, and the next thing seems really hard as you're making progression, you kind of stop and you look and go, where am I, how did I get here? It's good to be able to look back and go, oh, I said yes back there, I can trust where I am
mhm,
right now. And I said, and how did I get there? Well, I said yes back there, and that's how I got to there. And that's how I can trust that where I am right now. So we're building trust. We're building trust upon trust in God for a new way of living, a new way of ministering, a new way of being present to God, present to ourselves, present to our congregations, to the other people on our staff. And it just takes time, and it's a slow growth, and it's a long
mhm,
period. But like I think most of the time I would say if I knew what I was signing up for when I said yes, I don't know if I would have done that. But then when you build up enough yeses, you're able to say, I can't imagine any other option. Like this was the only option. It was the best. And I hear some of that in what you're
mhm,
saying. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know if I had any other options. And then this was presented to me. This was a way forward through what felt like burnout, and kind of didn't want to crash and burn. So yeah, you said yes, and it led you on a journey, and at times painful, right? And hard and
mhm. Oh, yeah.
anguishing, a lot of waiting. And
Mhm,
I just think that, so looking at the kind of the spectrum of churches and worship pastors, and like you talked about a little bit earlier, like they're the stage can be a very alluring place, right? And
mhm,
especially in this array of churches, like there are some churches that it becomes even more alluring, and you don't really even have to have a deep inner life to be a very successful singer leader of other people in certain settings. And so I just sense that what your heart is matches mine, is that regardless of where on this kind of spectrum of churches a worship leader might find themselves, it doesn't matter. Are you on a staff of 2 or a staff of 50 or 200?
mhm,
Like, how are you intentionally caring for your soul? Because the stage and the weight of ministry and the pressure, and even the kind of ministry you do where you are connected to your heart and trying to help other people connect as well, exposes you to so much, just in terms of um, vulnerability, yeah, to your own brokenness that you may or may not even know
mhm,
about, your own kind of vision of what you think life is supposed to look like, and if it's supposed to look up and to the right, does this next church get me more up and to the right? Or,
mhm.
and so
Yeah.
we're a lot of the narratives we're following, we have to really unpack and own and pay attention to, and say, is there a better story? Is there another way to do this. So I'm remembering not too many years ago, I was involved in like a consulting process with a church I was familiar with, looking for a new worship pastor. And it wasn't, uh, I had somebody I was talking with and trying to help paint this picture of what this church could be and trying to help that connection happen. And I remember I heard myself saying to this particular worship leader, here's what you need to do. Y- You need to go in with a really healthy sense of like who you are. And so when you go in, of course, you're going to find problems. Of course, there's going to be, and you're going to look around because, and the context of where this church was like tons of other very successful churches all around. Just like, I mean, if you walked into a Starbucks, guaranteed you were going to find either a barista or people sitting there who are worship leaders or like, on worship teams. So like incredible space and place for music and worship. I was just like, it'd be so easy to go into this church and almost immediately begin to look around at what other churches are doing, what they have, what
Mhm.
you kind of perceive that you lack, and if only you were there. And that temptation, I think, follows a lot of worship leaders. There's a comparison game going on all
Mhm.
the time.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of saying, if you could just go in knowing who you are and settled in that, like as the beloved, and recognizing that what this church wants is someone to want to be with them, someone to just walk and journey with them and pastor and shepherd and care for them, and the staff needs someone like that to come in who is just able to be present. And it was just like it seemed like so simple, yet it's so challenging in the culture. So I'm just thinking, Shawn, about one of the things we say on our website. And if people haven't figured this out yet, I want to just say this now. Shawn is a part of our soul care team with LifePoint. So Shawn is a spiritual director, as he mentioned, and he's one of the spiritual directors who has just said yes to being a part of our community and saying, I want to do this ministry and I don't want to do it by myself. I want to do it in a
Mhm.
community. So grateful that you are part of that, Shawn. But when we were launching LifePoint, it was very important for us to have language around this idea that soul care ought to be for everyone. And I just would love to hear from you, like in the context of worship ministry and kind of that wide array of churches, your heart, what does that mean? Like soul care ought to be for everyone.
I mean, I do have a heart for, I guess, the whole spectrum of like worship leaders. Like everybody needs that kind of that soul care, but like a lot of my ministry's been in parachurch organizations or churches of 200 people and less. So and I'm currently at a church that's, average size of church in America is less than 100, and that's where we
Mm,
find ourselves. We're like 75 people. I'm leading worship. I started there from scratch. It was like a relaunch. So they'd lost their space and they didn't have a place. And so they did drive-in church for 2 years. And then they had a building built, and then they needed a worship leader because they didn't have one. And I just moved to the area and found them and felt like it was a God thing. But um, my heart is for probably, more specifically, like everybody in ministry, any worship leader, but like the worship leader that is in a smaller church that doesn't necessarily, that is very much like, I'm just scratching by with, we don't have much of a budget. I don't have a big team. It's like, um,
maybe even like like working multiple jobs, even, like that they don't even have a budget at their church. Yeah.
yeah, I have a heart for people that are in those circumstances. And honestly, when I look at the landscape of the church, I think that that's going to become more and more the norm.
Mm,
Uh, uh, and so, how do we do this in a healthy way so that there's, fruit that's born, even in a small, unglamorous church, like the and how do you faithfully serve these people,
mhm.
whatever that church looks like? So I've I've led worship in many different church, like interesting church settings. I was thinking about this as well, and this might be helpful. So, like, the first church that I was a part of as like a worship leader was a small multicultural church plant when I was in
Mhm.
college studying, and so we we met in a classroom. And we used the overhead projector with the transparency sheets.
Mhm.
Like we had no bells and whistles. It was just me on an acoustic guitar and vocals, and eventually I got like maybe another singer or somebody like occasionally would do like a djembe and things like that. But never had a big team, never had a full band. And
Mhm.
we started off with 7 people, I think, and grew to like 55 plus. And then that church died, which again, while I was there, like, and that was a painful thing. And that was another, I think that was the thing I ended up having to be in counseling for multiple years down the road, because I just kind of just went to the next thing and didn't even grieve it or think about it because I was young, I was just, coming out of college. And so like I had that experience, and then led worship for college students in a campus ministry at Missouri State University. So it's like all college students. So like energetic, like young people, those type of things, lots of fun, lots of different things. And then led worship at a vineyard church that was probably a little bit more towards the aging
Mhm.
congregation, and like was
Mhm.
bringing in somebody because like worship needed help and want to try and grow young. And that was where the burnout happened. There was like it's trying to hold on to a church that church. It was after I left, but eventually did close as well. And so like I've been through a little bit of just experiencing like, hey, we have these dreams of either revitalizing a church or starting a church and it dying. And I think God is still in it, but it's painful. It hurts. And so, like, people that are in the midst of that or have gone through that, like, my heart is for you. And like,
Mhm.
uh, keep keep going, but make sure that you get healthy if you need it. Like, again, I took when I left that church until my current church, I was kind of freelancing for like 4 years,
Mhm.
and I needed that space to not be as involved in the everyday grinding it out every Sunday thing to do
Mhm.
the healing, to have space to process things, to meet with counselor and things like that. And so, yeah, I just want to come alongside people that are dealing with just the realities of this is a small congregation. It's hard.
Yeah.
We don't have the resources, and we don't look like, and we may never look like, the
Mhm.
mega church down the street that has all these wonderful things, like killer musicians that can,
Mhm.
are way better than I will
Mhm.
ever be. Uh, but I can still faithfully serve God with my
Yeah.
guitar, with my voice, and lead people in worship that um, hopefully, God, it connects them with God, and strengthens their souls and their
Yep.
connection with God.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I mean, I also try and do this with my team a little bit. Like every time I've gone to a new church, I've basically tried to instill some discipleship, prayer, different type of things to invest in my team and hopefully make sure that they're growing and that they're healthy, spiritually as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Worship.
I used to just kind of say I'm a pastor first and a musician second. And unless you think that means
Mhm.
I'm like downplaying music or the importance of excellence and, the ability to like actually do good music together, that's not what I mean. But what I do mean
Mhm.
is that above and beyond, far above all that, is what I do care about is you and your own journey with God. And I don't want this thing that we're doing together to be reduced down to simply, man, that was an awesome guitar solo. Did you see it? Like people's faces were melting, and just like
Yeah.
walking off stage and just high-fiving because of that sense or that feeling of performance, because all that creates in us is like, how do we top that next time? How do we keep that
Mhm.
or go higher? And so just noticing we are real people, and the journey I have and the journey I want to go on with others in community is let's grow together to become more and more people of love, loving each other. And if you've ever worked in the worship ministry space, like you have, Shawn, and those some who are listening haven't, like that's oftentimes a hard place because like loving one another well and being for one another because there's so much going on in our hearts. We're just some of the artistic
Mhm.
personality there makes for some pretty interesting ministry circumstances in that space. So another reason why I think worship leaders and pastors and need this kind of soul care because
Mhm.
this is the water we're swimming in, right, all the time, and sometimes you don't even know it. So yeah, I totally agree with
Yeah.
you and hear your heart in that, and I'm with you. I do. I'm for kind of everyone on that vast array because I
Mhm.
recognize the pressures that somebody who is in a church that's like constantly like evaluating every detail of the weekend service because they know they can always tweak it to make it better. Like I know that that pressure exists and it's hard. I mean, you might enjoy it, you might think this is the most fun I've ever had, but internally, what's going on? Like, what
Yeah.
are the pressures you're going to sleep at night thinking about and waking up thinking about, and how is that like kind of disconnecting you from that peace that God wants to give you as you do ministry with God in the midst of something like that? All the way, yeah, through. I mean, just thinking about varied denominations and worship styles. And so, you know, more liturgical styles, all the way to more like you were in a vineyard church, more expressive, spirit filled styles. And all the way from small churches to really large churches. And really, you mentioned multicultural and the diversity there as well as just male and female worship leaders too. So we're just two guys talking about
Mhm.
worship, but we recognize that that women are in those roles called by God and function as pastors, and also need the same kind of care that you and I have both experienced and received. And so, soul care for
Mhm.
everyone. So, I
Mhm.
just want to let everyone know who's listening to this conversation that the reason why we felt this was important to have a conversation and for you to hear it is because part of what LifePoint wants to do going forward is actually build a worship leader collective, some kind of a space where a cohort of worship leaders, not just pastors paid, but you know, bivocational or just you know, serving as a volunteer, but in that lead role, can come and have a community, a cohort that will hold them for a period of time and introduce to them principles of spiritual formation and soul care for them. But I loved how you also brought up your heart for your team because I think my heart would be that this has multiplying effects. So somebody comes
Mhm.
to this cohort that we create, and then maybe it's a 9 month or year long cohort, and they are experiencing a space that you had and a space that I've had, you know, in your spiritual direction training. That cohort piece was huge. Walking
Mhm.
in community with other people, having the same conversation is huge. It's a huge part of our growth and our kind of our opening ourselves up to what God has for us. So we want to create this kind of space where we're helping worship leaders become healthy at the and more in their soul, and to seek health and desire health and intimacy with God at the foundation of who they are, and then be able to take back to their teams what they're learning and being able to just kind of shepherd their teams then in the same kind of way. And maybe just introducing to them, you know, prayer and Bible study is great, but what about like where we could slow down and really listen and choose to not just be in our heads, but actually let what, you know, let this experience and this relationship move into our hearts, you know? So I don't know what that would look like for people, but really, I think a byproduct of calling worship leaders together to a small cohort and a collective and a journey would be that they are able to then go back and bring that to their community, to their team. So, Shawn, thank you for being willing to share your own journey of opening and awakening to your belovedness. It's been a beautiful journey for me to watch, and not just watch, but like actually come alongside. And so I'm so glad that you're a part of this ministry we're doing. And I hope it's for years to come. And I really do hope that as these cohort ideas and this worship leader collective idea just begins to take shape, that us working together, we will just get to experience so much delight in seeing who God brings and how God really opens up people to all that God has for them. And I'm excited to be on, I'm excited to be in this spot, in this place with you. Thanks again to Shawn Smith for sharing in this conversation. We hope this episode will have some longevity. It'll be long lasting. Can you help by sharing it with the worship leader in your life? Maybe they're in your church, maybe they're in your own home. We want to build a worship leader collective together. In the meantime, grace and peace.